Do you remember, well, I'm sure you do, I've played it often enough since I got the tape from the ABC many years ago. Do you remember Tim Flannery's warning in 2007, the former our chief climate commissioner then, claiming that global warming would empty our dams?
Even the rain that falls isn't actually going to fill our dams and our river system.
When is Tim Flannery and the whole global warming industry going to admit that they were wrong? Because, of course, we've seen the dams of Sydney and Melbourne overflowing more than once, Canberra's too. And now a viewer has sent me film of a sight not seen in 26 years. Victoria's giant Thomson Reservoir filled to overflowing with more rain coming. That's Melbourne's main dam. The global warming theory is not working out as so many predicted. But people like Flannery and Federal Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen refuse to admit it. And that has consequences that you are now feeling. It's this cost of living crisis that their global warming religion has helped to cause. Because of this climate hysteria, we've had Victoria ban drilling for gas and fracking. Think of all the emissions they say. We've had South Australia and New South Wales ban fracking in parts of their states. We've had coal mine licences slowed or blocked. We've had a third of our coal-fired generators shut in a decade. And now, hello, we're short of fossil fuels. Who would have guessed? And prices through the roof, of course. Yet Minister Chris Bowen will this week fly to the latest UN climate change conference in Egypt to argue for even less fossil fuels and more wind and solar power.
We're committing $20 billion to upgrade and expand Australia's electricity grid to allow new renewables in and drive down power prices. This budget is part of our government's commitment and our roadmap to delivering cleaner and more affordable energy to households and businesses, putting us on track to be a renewable energy superpower.
Now, whether you think global warming is a catastrophe or wildly exaggerated, the fact remains that technically what Bowen is promising is impossible and dangerous. And this has all been brilliantly laid out in an article in the City Journalist, a journal published by the Manhattan Institute in the US, which does something rare. It talks about the engineering. The article is by Mark Mills, who's a physicist, a faculty fellow at Northwestern University and partner in an energy tech venture fund. He joins me now. Mark Mills, thank you so much for your time. Now, we're told here in Australia that the answer to these soaring electricity prices, the soaring gas prices, is just to work faster to switch to wind and solar power, backed up with batteries. Our Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Chris Bowen, says, well, look, solar and wind, that's always going to be cheaper, despite recent problems with the supply chain. Here he is this week.
Renewable energy is by many lengths of the straight the cheapest form of energy, and those supply chain constraints don't change that.
Mark Mills, is Chris Bowen right?
So sadly, no, but we don't have to guess or speculate. Every place in the world, every country, every U.S. state that has higher share of electricity from wind and solar has more expensive electricity delivered to consumers. There are no exceptions. So the promise that it was cheaper is not being realized yet. It probably won't be realized in the future because oil, gas, and coal are necessary to build the massive machines needed for the dreamed of energy transition, and everything is getting more expensive. It's a little ironic that government policies that have discouraged the exploration and production and increased the resilience of hydrocarbon supply chains, those policies that have discouraged that have directly caused increase in oil and gas prices. So now we're being told that the solution is to build more wind and solar when, look, it's impossible to surge a wind turbine or surge solar arrays. When there's crisis from weather or geopolitical events, you can surge coal production and coal burning. You can surge oil and gas. These things can be stored easily. They can be surged in times of crises. And the world always faces crises. It's wired in to the nature of human nature and the nature of Mother Nature.
Well, you make the point that you can certainly store coal for surging purposes. There's just a mountain over there, whereas storing electricity in the form of batteries is hugely expensive, which brings me to this question. Can we actually build all this green energy stuff we're told we need wind, solar, batteries, green hydrogen even, at the speed we're told is necessary?
Well, the short answer to that is just no. And this, again, it's not a political observation. It's a practical observation at the velocity with which we can build stuff, big things. And the world's a very big place. The rate of construction, just digging stuff up, making concrete and steel, basic things, the rate of construction required to meet these aspirations exceeds a global war mobilization. And not just a mobilization for a year or two for a global war, which I hope we don't get, but for decades mobilizing infrastructure, construction, and spending at that level. That's simply not in evidence of happening nor being affordable. Maybe more importantly, the giant roadblock to these aspirations are the minerals. I mean, Australia, my homeland Canada, are big mining countries. But I can tell you, we know for a fact, and it's again not my data, but International Energy Agency data, World Bank data, IMF, International Monetary Fund data, the world is not now mining nor planning to mine enough of the metals and minerals needed to build these machines. And not just by a little bit, but by factors of 400 to 4,000% short of what's required to build all the solar panels, all the batteries, all the wind turbines. We're not even mining or planning to mine enough copper, and one of the most basic ancient elements. We've been mining copper since before recorded history. We know a lot about copper, and we know we're not even mining enough copper to build all the electrical infrastructure and all the machines that are associated with this so-called transition that we want to undertake.
And we've also seen the prices of some of these minerals that we need for the transition, like lithium in particular for car batteries, electric car batteries, absolutely soaring. And speaking of electric cars, we're told we must switch to electric cars here in Australia, half of all new car sales by 2030, in part by banning cheaper petrol ones. We're told electric cars will in fact get cheaper. We're in fact told that most of the new technology we need will get cheaper. Solar will get cheaper. Wind will get cheaper. Is that true?
Well, it's not getting cheaper now. For the last year or two or several years for wind turbines, they've all been getting more expensive. They're getting more expensive precisely the supply chain reasons that seem to be ignored in the green path versus the conventional path. You have to mine a lot of copper and a lot of nickel, molybdenum, and cobalt, and aluminum. And as you increase the demand for those minerals and metals, their price goes up. About 60 to 70% of the cost of making a battery for a car is just in the purchase of the raw materials. Those raw material prices are going up. It's making the batteries get more expensive. So all of the assumptions that these technologies will get cheaper are essentially entirely anchored in wishful thinking about enough metals being mined and those materials getting cheaper. They're not getting cheaper. They're getting more expensive. And that says nothing about the geopolitical exposure and risks. If we're talking about supply chain risks, supply chain exposures, China's dominance in refining critical energy minerals is roughly double OPEC's dominance in the oil markets. This will not end well if, from a geopolitical perspective, as we keep increasing our dependence on suppliers who are not always exactly friendly to countries like Australia and the United States.
And we have this huge focus on getting rid of petrol-driven cars. It seems like the poster child of the enemy, the smirch of the global warming movement. But you make the point that mobile phones and even iCloud, or we could add Bitcoin to that, they're massive users of energy. And in fact, the energy in making mobile phones now exceeds, you say, by 15% the energy made in making all the cars in the world as well. Shouldn't activists be actually focused on these emblems of the new generation, mobile phones, etc.?
Well, I write about the facts. I actually like electric cars. I just don't believe we'll build as many as people think. Mandating people to use an expensive vehicle is not going to have a good outcome. It's also true that this very energy, our global cloud, our internet, all the devices we like, the zooming we like to do, it's very energy intensive. Globally speaking, all of the features of the internet and the global cloud all collectively use roughly twice as much electricity as the entire country of Japan does. And the growth rate in that domain is actually faster than the growth rate for cars. So it's kind of ironic. You're right. I mean, the tech community wants to buy green. I understand that, and they promote green. But the reality is the average energy provided for most things in the world comes from hydrocarbons, for the simple fact that over 80% of all the world's energy comes from hydrocarbons. So this amorphous idea that we can abandon them is not evident in the facts. We've spent, I'll say it again, the world has spent, not just Europe, something like $5 trillion trying to avoid hydrocarbons, and we've reduced the share of the world's energy coming from hydrocarbons by 2 percentage points in 20 years after $5 trillion of spending. It's a very big system. There will be energy transitions. They'll just take a lot longer than anybody imagines, and they won't be in the form that people imagine today.
Mark Mills, you make a fool of the Greens politicians who have been telling us for 20 years that coal mines will be a stranded asset. We've seen coal prices go through the roof. Thank you so much indeed for your time. Brilliant article. I'm going to recommend that all viewers read it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.